Well, China's coronavirus continues to spread. Authorities are saying the outbreak could peak in 10 days. There have now been 132 deaths, close to 6,000 cases, and 16 countries outside China have confirmed cases. As you can see from this graph, the number of cases has spiked over the past week, and the city of Wuhan continues to be at the centre of the outbreak. The authorities are telling residents not to travel anywhere. And this is the situation in which some of those residents are living. Completely deserted streets, as you can see, because people are not only being told not to leave the city, they're being told not to leave their homes. Also in Wuhan, this has been happening. 2 new hospitals are being built, especially for coronavirus patients. The first has over 1,000 beds, and we're told it will be finished within a week. Well, you can also see conditions inside one of the existing hospitals in Wuhan. Dozens of patients have to queue for checks. New patients are arriving all the time, and you can see everyone is wearing face masks, some medical staff wearing full body suits as well. And then this is in Hong Kong, where people have been queuing for a huge amount of time to buy face masks because there's a citywide shortage of them. Well, as we have done every day since this crisis began, the Chinese authorities have been briefing us.
We are now in a critical period of the prevention of this epidemic. We need to control the potential source of the virus.
Well, the BBC's Stephen McDonnell has just been to Hubei province to report. He's back in Beijing, where he's based, and this is his latest update.
Everybody who's been in Hubei province is expected to stay away from their workplace for 2 weeks. And so that's what I'm doing, as others are. It's just that the authorities are taking more and more strict precautions when you go into buildings. I mean, I'm back in Beijing now. You go into buildings, you're having your temperature checked, whether it be an office building or a building where people live with flats. The streets are very quiet in the Chinese capital. I mean, it's normally kind of quiet for the Spring Festival, but it's very quiet. People are not walking around. They don't want to leave their homes if they don't have to for risk of being infected. There's an interesting comparison with SARS. So people on social media are plotting the trajectory of this coronavirus with the SARS outbreak in 2002. Now, it seems that this is a much more infectious virus.
Well, we've heard the update of the Chinese authorities. Next, let's hear from the World Health Organization.
The whole world needs to be on alert now. The whole world needs to take action and be ready for any cases that come, either from the original epicenter or from other epicenters that become established.
So the virus continues to spread, but there has been a breakthrough. Scientists in Australia have recreated this new coronavirus, and that may help efforts to diagnose and treat it. Here's the head of the team behind that work.
This step makes it possible for a lot of things to move forward that have been delayed, and we're just delighted to have been able to fill that gap in the space between 2 a.m. Saturday morning, when the first case was diagnosed in Australia, and Monday, when we believe we had the virus growing in culture.
Well, hundreds of British citizens are being flown back to the UK from Wuhan on Thursday. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym, saying it's understood that British passengers joining the flight from Wuhan will be required to sign a contract committing them to a 14-day quarantine period on their arrival, and it's believed they'll have to stay in a British military facility. A number of other countries are also evacuating their citizens. For example, these pictures show us some of over 200 Japanese citizens who have arrived back in Tokyo. Medics carried out checks on board and at the airport, but no mandatory quarantine is planned there. And we know over 200 Americans, including diplomats and their families, have been evacuated from Wuhan, and they're now going to travel to California, where they'll be quarantined at the March Air Reserve Base. I've been speaking to the BBC's Sophie Long in Los Angeles about this.
Well, we don't know exactly how long they will stay there at the moment. We know that they will be housed there for what people are saying a period of time. That could be a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Now, that plane, US government charter plane, left China just before dawn local time. It went via Anchorage in Alaska. So they were screened twice before leaving China. They underwent 2 more screenings in Alaska before moving on again to Southern California, where they are now. Now, obviously, a pretty concerning time for all those people on board. 201 US nationals, most of them diplomats, some business people as well. And we're told that when that plane landed in Alaska and the crew said, "Welcome to the United States," there were huge cheers throughout the plane.
And Sophie, what's the general advice being offered to Americans if they were considering travelling to China?
Well, if people are considering travelling to China, we're currently at a level 3, which means that people shouldn't travel. They're advised not to travel unless their travel is essential. Now, there is one level higher than that, a level 4, which would mean just don't go. So we're not at that stage at the moment. I think the message here from public health officials is to not be alarmed. They've been very clear about what's happening in China is not what's happening here in the United States. There are currently 5 confirmed cases, 2 in California, 1 in Arizona, Illinois, and 1 in Washington State as well. So the trajectory of the disease at the moment is not alarming, and people should not be alarmed in the United States. That's not to say, though, that rumours are there was an erroneous message on social media that there had been a confirmed case at the University of Southern California. Well, there was a statement from the school saying that was not the case. So the main message here at the moment in the United States is don't travel to China unless you have to, but don't be alarmed unless you've come into prolonged contact, and by that they mean more than 10 minutes in direct contact with a confirmed case. Otherwise, people should remain calm.
Another story here connected to the coronavirus. In the last couple of hours, World Athletics has announced the postponement of the World Indoor Championships in Nanjing in March due to fears over the coronavirus. The sport's governing body is saying it's now looking to stage the event at the same venue in 1 year's time. So this virus having ramifications in lots of different areas. Other developments include British Airways announcing it suspended all direct flights to and from mainland China. That follows United Airlines already saying it would reduce its schedule. Meanwhile, the UK government and its officials have been holding what's called a Cobra meeting to discuss the virus. Here you can see some of the attendees arriving for that. This is an emergency meeting that's called when a national crisis in the UK arises. Often it's related to terrorist incidents or extreme flooding. This time the meeting follows the UK Foreign Office telling Britons to cancel all but essential travel to China. While Australia plans to quarantine its evacuees on Christmas Island, which is around 2,000 kilometres from the Australian mainland. These people who are taken there are going to have to stay in this recently reopened immigration centre. As many as 600 Australians are involved, including around 100 children. They've registered as being in Wuhan or the wider Hubei province. Let's hear from Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
We cannot give a guarantee that this operation is able to succeed. And I also want to stress very clearly that we may not be in a position, if we're able to do this on one occasion, to do it on another occasion.
Well, the decision to use Christmas Island has raised a few eyebrows. This detention centre has been a controversial part of Australia's border protection policies, which sees some asylum seekers housed at this facility. ABC's China correspondent Bill Birtle says he's gauging reaction from a Wuhan Australians WeChat group. He says there's a lot of concern about medical facilities on Christmas Island, about conditions for kids. He goes on a comment that keeps coming up, it's probably better to stay in Wuhan. We also saw this from another ABC journalist, Sophie McNeil. She's been talking about how this feels wrong. Australian citizens under quarantine like this in a remote place that doesn't have expert medical facilities. Would we really do this, she asked, if such a virus was taking place in the UK? And ABC Australia is also reporting that the 1,400 people who live on the island were not told about this announcement before it was made public. The community leader there has told ABC he saw the Prime Minister's announcement via SBS, which is a public broadcaster. He says regressive colonial-era ideas since 2001 create conflict settlement for innocent people. Now will be a leper colony, he says, although it is worth noting he's been a vocal critic of the federal government's decisions about the island more broadly. Let's get more on this story. Shaima Khalil is our correspondent in Sydney.
This detention centre is going to be quarantine zone, if you will. And upon hearing that, many have raised the question of why is it that 600 Australians, including 100 children that travelled with their families to celebrate the Lunar Year, instead of being brought to hospitals, why are they being brought to Christmas Island, about 2,000 kilometres from the mainland? It's actually closer to Indonesia than it is to Australia mainland.
And while China is grappling with this ever-developing crisis, it's also taken issue with a Danish newspaper for publishing this cartoon. It's the Chinese flag, but as you can see, it has virus germs in place of stars. China's demanding an apology. The newspaper has responded, and of course, I've got a little help here with the Danish translation. It's not coming up, but I was going to show you it. The newspaper saying China wants to control Danish media and has shown no inclination to take down the picture or indeed apologise for it.